Awesome. So hello, everyone. My name is Miranda Bermudez. I'm an anthropology student. I graduated in May, and it is approaching so quickly. My project is In the Shadows of Stigma, Perceptions of Gender Among Women of India's Modern Denotified Chara Tribe. So before I get started, I just super quickly want to prereq this with a positionality statement. So in anthropology, as an anthropologist and as a white Western scholar, I'm acutely aware of the complex layers and power dynamics and the historical contexts that frame my engagement and my reporting on Indigenous communities. So my positionality is marked not only by a blend of privilege, but an ongoing journey towards understanding the intricacies of culture and histories that are not my own. This positionality statement is not an endpoint, but a part of a continuous reflective process on my part. It represents my commitment to an ongoing dialogue with and learning from the Indigenous communities that I work with, and acknowledging the gaps in my understanding and the need for constant vigilance against unconsciously perpetuating colonialist narratives. So my ultimate aim is to contribute to scholarship that in a way not only amplifies Indigenous voices, but supports their sovereignty and self-determination and recognizes the value of Indigenous knowledge systems and worldviews. So my research question is, what is the role of gender among Chara women, including, if any, desires for change in existing gender structures? So my field site, I traveled to India. I ended up going to the state of Gujarat, which is the highlighted red part here. And specifically within Gujarat, I was in the city of Ahmedabad, which you can see circled. And here's a picture of the community within that city that I specifically worked with. India is very big and very vast, and there's a lot going on there. But the community I work with is actually relatively small if you look at the street layout of their settlement, modern settlement. So a little bit of background. Who are the Chara? So the Chara are a modern denotified tribe in India. So they were previously nomadic. They traveled around. They didn't have any set designated land area. And that was all before British settler colonialism. And in the past, they made money and specialized in performances. They were like a performance tribe. Most tribes had different modes of income. Theirs was mostly performances. And that varied, but primarily in theater performances. And then I actually have right here a picture from my field site. It's one of their little public stages that they use. They mostly use it now for theater activism. So a little bit more background too. In 1875, the British imposed the Criminal Tribes Act, which notified hundreds of tribes as born criminal. It essentially pushed the idea that criminality is hereditary and you could inherit it, like you could inherit your parents' eye color. They believed, or they pushed that these tribes are born criminals and that there's nothing beyond that for them. They're all criminals and it's just a perpetual cycle. So this had many different issues, obviously, for many of these tribes, not just the Chara, but specifically for the Chara, this forced sedentary living on them. It stopped them from being mobile and moving around. It also limited their movement, and it was a form of registering tribes as an act of colonialism. And the born criminal label ultimately limited their modes of income and what they were able to have access to in Indian society. I think that it's also interesting to note too that when I was there, my advisor and I had extreme difficulty getting in and out of the field site. We didn't stay there, we stayed in the city. and Ubers and taxi drivers and even tuk-tuk drivers refused to take us to the field site. And then another thing too, so the Criminal Tribes Act ended up getting later denotified under the Raj government during India's independence. The issue with that is that subsequent policies that were extremely similar and rooted in colonial ideology still ended up hindering many of indigenous populations moving forward. So even with the denotification of these tribes, their upward mobility was limited. The Chars specifically still face extreme prejudice and marginalization. And also due to this stigma, specifically the women, they often had to resort to brewing illegal alcohol as a mode of income because they can't find jobs outside of their settlement. And overall, in general, the community still experiences prevalent police brutality and violent raids. So my inspiration I wanted to touch on is thanks to my advisor, Dr. Kimball's parent project called Indigenous Community Justice Knowledge. So it was thanks to him and his work that he was doing in his previous engagement with the community and Basha Research and Publication Center that ended up giving me the opportunity to meet the Char community and work with them. And this is a timeline, kind of a rundown of my project, starting with applying for the Office of Undergrad Research Funding, getting my IRB approved, that whole process, field work, data analysis. Now I'm all the way over here on submission and presentations, and I'm tidying up my ethnographic thesis. So for my research design methodology, I had a snowball sample of participants for Kimball's relationship with the community. I employed participant observation, and I also used structured interviews with translator assistance. So part of my budget for my funding I used to pay for community translators. So my participants, I worked with 5 Char women, but I also employed a focus group interview to run down the whole process after everything with my translators because they were there throughout all of it. So I felt that was really beneficial insight. And then also some of my project partners as well. So rundown of my participant demographics. I had age ranges from 18 to 71. They varied in education. So the highest level completed being either ranging through primary, which is elementary school, through college education. So vast range there. I also was happy with the variation that I had in modes of income. So the socioeconomic representation I had varied more than I thought because they are a structured community. It's obviously rough out there as far as just the infrastructure of buildings, access to electricity, access to water, things like that, especially when you start moving towards Wi-Fi, more modern things. So it was cool to see a full scale of socioeconomic representation. I was in more upper end housing with college graduate student. So I like having that representation in my data. And then as far as modes of income too, still vastly spanning anywhere from a college student to a shop business owner to an actual brewer of illegal alcohol, which was really cool. Okay, data collection. So I utilized qualitative data analysis methods because they're best for capturing oral history, personal stories, and lived experiences within anthropology. I utilized audio recordings of interviews with a voice recorder and field notes from participant observation. So some of my insight from my reflexivity of going through and working with this population. Again, too, within qualitative data analysis for my analysis, transcription of interviews, which includes coding analysis for emerging themes that come up in each transcript, and then data analysis using in vivo qualitative software. It's a software that I've trained on for this process that helps me do the coding, just kind of itemizes everything for me. And then ultimately working to identify any cross-sectional themes that I can draw between and kind of present a bigger picture of my findings. So my preliminary results, I'm struggling with what I want to present because there's a lot in the transcripts and in what they say. So this is preliminary for now, but it will be more completed for research day. So my general findings, the strongest theme that I found is just an overall recognition of the importance of education. Everybody I talked to understood and knew how important education was to help get them to that next threshold of being able to obtain social mobility, upward social mobility. Participants also highlighted the limitations of that upward social mobility due to the lingering colonial foreign criminal stigma. So as much as even if they did have access to higher education and they were able to go to college, they were still struggling because of that lingering stigma. And then here I wanted to highlight specific voices. Actually, let me go back. I'm sorry. I want to point out, this is kind of important. I think that it's useful to separate some of the views from my younger participants and my older participants because I have such a vast range in age. The younger participants desired change regarding access to education opportunities, but it seemed really relevant, and it came up a lot that the younger girls wanted personal freedoms regarding traveling abroad and their ability to travel, and also specifically even freedoms as far as their day-to-day movement without having to ask for permission to go do things. Lastly, for the younger generation, I thought this was important. All of them stated that they had planned on getting married older. They were waiting and prioritizing their education before getting married. The older participants wanted to see a change in family pride structures that hinge on actions of women and girls and families. So when a woman or a girl does something wrong, it shames the family, and the older women have decided that they don't like that. They don't want that. And I thought that that was really interesting from the older generation. They also, the older generation made points to say that they desire to see change in ending arranged marriages, which I think is really awesome because that is a very prevalent practice in India. And then lastly, I thought this was funny. The older generation wanted to see a change in the declining work ethic of both men and women of the younger generation. And they feel that those are due to advancements in technology and just kind of how things have changed. And then this part, I wanted to highlight some of the quotes of the women. Up top is one of the youngest, and then in the bottom is one of the oldest participants. In the top, she said, usually most of the couples in Charnagar, the husband will be alcoholic and the wife will be selling the alcohol. The wife handles the business stuff and the money. And then the older, this is my oldest participant, and she's the one who actually brews alcohol illegally for a living and has. And she said, in other societies, women are educated and have jobs. And in Charnagar, the girls don't normally study up to 10th grade. So the future for them is just selling alcohol. So the significance is that I'm hoping to contribute to the preservation of Indigenous women's voices and the growing dialogue surrounding gender roles. And I also want to help address existing gaps in literature surrounding the Shara and as it pertains to gender because it's just not available. I also want to highlight the evolution of gender politics and the ways in which there's a desire for change and evolution in the existing gender structures. And ultimately too, I'm aiming to highlight the impact of lingering colonial stigma on tribal lived experiences.
We probably need to wrap it up so that we have a time for videos.
Perfect. And then my limitations, we don't need that. And then, yeah, just also thank you for my advisor. Thank you to the OUR for funding my research and getting me the funding I needed to go out and do this. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Oh, my question was, what is the average age of marriage for the women?
Oh, I had that thought last night where I was like, I should probably like write all of this down because it is in my transcripts, but as far as me having it all located, because that is one of the questions I ask is, are you married and for how long? So some of them I'm just gonna have to do some math on, but I want to say that average, I guess I can't speak to it specifically, but I want to say the average was early 20s, which isn't as young as I had anticipated.
Yeah. I was just curious since they were making such like they were talking about it a lot, like wanting to wait to get married and also, wanting to avoid arranged marriage. I wonder how young are we talking?
The youngest, I can speak for sure to the youngest married was the oldest participant, 71-year-old. And she was married before 20. I remember that. It was like teens. Definitely not lower than 17 because I would have remembered that. But yeah.
So when you were talking about earlier, like trying to get there, you said that like almost no one there would actually begin with. Did they like say anything of like why they wouldn't, or was it just because of that like assumption, like, oh, they're beneath me?
Yeah, it's the stigma that lingers that they're born criminals. It's the idea that going into that community is gonna be bad news because there's nothing but criminality there. Yeah. I think you were first.
Okay. Did you see like a high precedence or hear a lot about like honor killings within this community?
Not at all.
Okay.
No, yeah, not at all. I think also too, that could be maybe because they're an indigenous culture and they didn't really follow a lot of that. I think a lot of that more falls on Hindu side of things and they have their own religion.
Okay.
And stuff, yeah.
Kind of going off of Casey, like, how did you end up getting into it?
So, I mean, waiting a long time for Ubers to not cancel. And then once we started getting in and told our project partners in Charnagar we were having issues, one of our project partners is a world-renowned documentarian, and he's Chara, and he does great activism work for the community. He knew some people, and so after that, in fact, leaving that day after we were like, yo, it took us forever, like he was kind of mad we were late, and we're like, dude, everybody kept canceling, and he was like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Like, he was like, oh, I should have arranged for a ride for you guys. Like, he kind of had that moment where it was like, oh, duh. But after that, he called up a tuk-tuk driver that he knew personally, and that's how we would kind of arrange for it, is he'd have to make phone calls to people he knew who would come and swoop us up from the city.
Was the society like shocked that you were so caring and like wanting to be involved?
I wouldn't say that the Chara were, because they are a research community and there is existing existing relationships with them. So I think that as it pertains to that, no, but I think that when we would talk to other people in our day-to-day, not just the Uber taxi drivers, but like, if somebody was like, oh, why are you guys here? And we would tell them, and we would tell them the community we worked with, everybody was kind of like, well, why them? Like, why are you guys going to, the criminal area? Like, what's going on? Almost like, I feel like with the Uber and taxi drivers too, if we were actually could get in front of them face to face with them, they were almost, I feel like they almost felt bad for us because I think that they thought that we were gonna get scammed and that we just didn't realize. Like, it was just a very interesting kind of thing to navigate. Yeah.
I'm really interested in the language. So does everybody speak English and you were fine, or did you have a translator with you?
I had a
And then
translator.
Also really interested in the translators that you worked with your research subjects,
Mhm.
and whether they were all women.
Okay, so, your first question, English is common among the younger generation. They're not comfortable speaking it, but they do understand it. My two youngest participants were the ones who spoke the most English. One of my youngest participants, one of the 18-year-olds, she was a partial translator for me because she was kind of helping learn her English and help. And then my main translator was a male who is part of the theater activism and the documentarian guy. And everybody who was in the office, the Chara office that we worked at, that worked with the documentarian, they all spoke English. So our hub base, before we would set out, all of that was in English. But then beyond that, I had to have my translator. And then, my 18-year-old, she's actually a good friend of mine now. She did a really good job on filling me in the things that he didn't.
That's what.
Yes, so that's one of the limitations on my study is that there's a loss of information innately that happens through translation. And so it was kind of cool to have her tag in these little things that she felt, hey, he didn't say this, but I want her to know this. She kind of give those to me and it was really awesome.
Fortunate and
Yeah, and it was really cool to do the focus group with the male interviewer because he obviously was working with all of my questions and material. And he knew which ones the participants struggled with the most. Like there's one specific question where like everybody just struggled with it. And so it was cool to have that debrief with him and have his insight as a male about the things that he sees pertaining to some of the things we talked about. I think that it was really useful to get that insight from him.
can you tell us which of the questions you spoke with?
Oh goodness, there's two specifically. One of them was twofold because it was opposite. And it was like, what would the world be like without men? And the opposite question, what would the world be like without women? And they struggled really hard with that because they, for the most part, took it extremely literal. Without, yeah, like, so that was an interesting one. The other one was really long, I can't remember, and I think that's why he had to break it down for them, I think, yeah, is what it was.
I have a two-part question. First one was Kimball with you during your interview process, or was this kind of a solo?
Yeah, I was on my own, yeah, it was cool, because he had his parent project he was working on, so he would, when we left the office, he would go do whatever it was he needed to do with, Doction, and I would go with my interviewer and one or two other project partners, so either the younger woman or the older woman, and that was it.
And the second part is, during your interview process, did you, what kind of attire did you have to wear, and do you think that impacted the results?
I definitely dressed modest the whole time I was in India. So making sure my thighs and arms and stuff are covered. And even when I wore a t-shirt, I would bring like, in my first slide, I'm wearing like a shawl over my arms because the sun was just like beating down. And I also realized like I have a lot of tattoos and I'm already very visibly the other. So I really wanted to be just cautious of maybe how that was perceived.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, thanks.
I had a question.
Or Jamie.
Did you feel safe there?
I did. Yeah, it's surprising. I mean, I've traveled the world. I'm a world traveler, so I've been a lot of places. So this definitely wasn't a culture shock per se. But but even with the stigma associated with the community and some of the horrible things I had read online, you know, in contrast to some of the very academic pieces written about the community, I did not feel not safe.
Mine's the easy question, I think, but what does denotified mean?
Yeah, so denotified is just, the process of the 1875 Criminal Trials Act being repealed. So denotified is what they called that process. So that DNT, the denotified that follows Chara, is just the moniker saying they were pegged as criminals, but now they're not. But it's interesting that it still needs that designation. And so you can kind of see how some of the follow-up policies kind of took place of the CTA. So yeah, they took CTA away, the Criminal Tribes Act. So yeah, they're denotified, but they're still carrying this denotified moniker. So yeah.
Is there interest or a movement within India to improve social justice for denotified tribes?
Yes, very minimally. My project partner, Dakshin, the documentarian, he actually just got nominated to be on their body of politics. I don't know it very well. I know it's like parliamentary style because of British colonialism, but he's part of a new sector that they've included for Indigenous, Adivasi, and denotified people. And so we're starting to see a pushback against even the current government and these types of people. Yeah.
So I have like one question. So with the like arranged marriages and younger generations kind of wanting to push back against that, is there also kind of a problem with, like, they can only find marriage within that
Yes.
community? Is
Yes.
that also part of
Yes.
the problem of why they can't get like higher educations and get kind of that freedom to be able to do that?
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's part of one of the tactics to keep their social mobility from moving is intercaste marriages. And that did come up in my research, and for the most part, even my male interviewer gave some of his insight about his feelings about some of their practices regarding intra-caste marriages. But for the most part, the younger and the older don't care about it, but it's still culturally implemented. Yeah. And it's really cute, actually, my youngest participant and the male interviewer, after I got back, so I guess maybe even like 4 or 5 months ago, they got engaged. So even though it's her biggest goal to finish her education and she really values not getting married young, they're engaged. And so I wrote her about this because I'm like, wait, like in my research, you said this, but like now you're engaged, what's up? And she said, yeah, that they're engaged, but they're definitely not planning on getting married until, I think she even said a year after she graduates. So she's still putting it as, you know, something to do after her education, which I thought was really cool. Yeah.
Also respect.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's funny listening back to some of the transcripts and them talking about marriage in English. And like, now I'm like, wait a second, did you guys know then? Or, I don't know, it's cute though, yeah. Yeah.
I apologize for asking more and more questions, but I feel like we could talk all night about this
Yeah.
really fascinating population of people and your experience with them. I'll make this my last question. Do you have a sense of the expectation of family size? Because we know that delaying marriage means fewer children and having a higher education, any kind of
Right.
education means fewer children. Are people thinking about that at all? Like,
No, I don't, it's not like in other, like, I feel like Asian cultures where like specifically too, like this did come up a little bit where I think the only expectation as far as family and family size goes is that you have at least one male child. There is still that designation and importance placed on having boy children and having that for the family. But it's interesting on the other side, the designation that they place on the asset of the women in the family as well, and what the women's role is for the family when they marry out and beyond that. Well, they're,
Culture is mobile.
well, it used to be, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, they might have carried on agriculture work like other tribes had done, but they were forcefully placed into this location by the government. And it's actually right by the airport. It is smack dab in the city. Cool, thanks, guys.